The fluorescent lights of St. Mary's Hospital buzzed softly, casting a pale, sterile glow over the pediatric ward as David Carter carried his 3-year-old son, Mason, down the long, quiet corridor. At 36, David's face bore the etched lines of sleepless nights, his shoulders sagging under the weight of responsibilities that seemed to grow heavier with each step. Mason, nestled in his arms, wore his favorite Superman pajamas, the bright blue fabric a defiant splash of color against the hospital's muted tones. Despite the rare blood disorder that had plagued him for 6 months, Mason's eyes sparkled with the same curiosity that both warmed and broke David's heart. "Daddy, are the doctors gonna make me feel better?" Mason's small voice echoed in the hallway, fragile but hopeful. David adjusted his son's weight, careful not to jostle the 4th line taped to his tiny arm. "They're the best, buddy," he said, forcing a smile. "They're gonna take care of you." For half a year, David had been waging a battle he never imagined fighting alone. Mason's diagnosis had upended their lives, demanding specialized treatments and frequent hospital stays that drained their meager savings. As a construction worker, David's insurance covered the basics, but the mounting medical bills were a relentless tide, threatening to drown him. He'd taken unpaid leave to be with Mason, and their small savings account had vanished weeks ago. Tonight, a fever spiking to 103 degrees had sent them rushing to the ER, David's heart pounding with the fear that he couldn't wait until morning. Every step down the corridor felt like a march toward an uncertain future. What if he couldn't afford the care Mason needed? What if he failed as a father when his son needed him most? As they passed the hospital's administrative wing, David glanced through glass doors where well-dressed figures sat around a polished conference table, their voices muffled but purposeful. Board members, he figured, debating budgets and policies while families like his navigated a labyrinth of medical debt and desperation. Mason stirred in his arms, suddenly pointing toward the glass. "Daddy, look. That's Mommy." David's breath caught, his steps faltering. At the head of the table stood a woman in a sleek white blouse and navy skirt, exuding confidence and authority. She was in her early 30s, blonde hair pulled back in a professional bun, her presence radiating success and wealth. She was nothing like the Sarah Mitchell who had walked out on them 2 years ago, when Mason was barely a year old, unable to handle the demands of motherhood and choosing her career instead. "Sweetie, that's not Mommy," David said gently, though his voice wavered. Sarah had vanished without a trace, leaving him to raise Mason alone. He hadn't heard from her since, and the wound still ached, though he'd buried it deep for Mason's sake. But Mason shook his head, stubborn as only a child could be. "It's her, Daddy. I know her smell. I know her voice." David frowned, wondering what had caught his son's eye. Before he could respond, the woman at the table looked up, her eyes locking with his through the glass. For a fleeting moment, her composed expression cracked, shock, recognition, and something like pain flickered across her face. She excused herself, her heels clicking as she moved toward the door. As she stepped into the hallway, David's heart stopped. It was Sarah. The polished exterior, the designer clothes, the air of success couldn't hide the truth. This was the woman who had given birth to Mason and then disappeared. "David," she said, her voice barely above a whisper, trembling with emotion. "Sarah," he replied, his own voice tight, a storm of anger, hurt, and disbelief swirling within him. Mason, undeterred by the tension, reached out with his small arms, his face lighting up. "Mommy, I knew it was you." Sarah's carefully built facade crumbled. Tears welled in her eyes as she looked at the son she hadn't seen in over 2 years. "Mason," she whispered, her voice breaking as she reached out hesitantly. David stood frozen, holding Mason between them, unsure whether to shield his son or let the moment unfold. Sarah looked nothing like the overwhelmed young mother who had left them. She was successful now, wealthy even, judging by her attire and the fact that she was leading a hospital board meeting. "What are you doing here?" she asked, though her eyes darted to Mason's hospital bracelet and the 4th line, and her face paled as realization hit. "Mason's sick," David said simply, his voice steady despite the surreal encounter. A blood disorder. He's been in and out of hospitals for months. Tonight, his fever spiked, so I brought him here." Sarah's hand flew to her mouth, her eyes fixed on Mason, who was still reaching for her with unwavering trust. "Can I hold him?" she asked, her voice small. David hesitated, then carefully passed Mason to her. The boy snuggled into her arms, as if some primal memory told him this was where he belonged. "I missed you, Mommy," Mason said, his tiny hand patting her cheek. Sarah closed her eyes, tears streaming down her face as she held him close. "I missed you too, baby," she whispered. "More than you'll ever know." David watched, his heart a battlefield of conflicting emotions. Part of him burned with anger at Sarah for abandoning them when they needed her most. But another part, the part that saw Mason's joy, felt a flicker of relief. "What happened to you?" he asked quietly. "Where have you been?" Sarah opened her eyes, looking at him over Mason's head. "After I left, I threw myself into work. I started a medical consulting company, and it grew faster than I ever dreamed. I became successful, wealthy even. But I told myself you and Mason were better off without me. I thought I was too selfish, too career-driven to be a good mother." She paused, stroking Mason's hair. "I was afraid you'd reject me, afraid Mason wouldn't know me, afraid I'd hurt you both again." David's jaw tightened, the hurt seeping through. "You never tried to contact us." Sarah nodded, her gaze dropping. "I was terrified. I thought staying away was the kind thing to do." Mason looked up at her, his eyes serious. "Are you staying this time, Mommy?" The question hung in the air, heavy and raw. Sarah looked from Mason to David, then back to her son. "If your daddy lets me," she said softly, "I want to try. I want to help you get better." David studied her, searching for any sign that this was a fleeting impulse, a decision she'd abandon when it got hard. But he saw something new, remorse, determination, a strength that hadn't been there before. "Mason needs his mother," he said finally, "and I can't do this alone anymore." Sarah nodded, tears spilling anew. "I'll do whatever it takes," she promised. Over the next weeks, Sarah stepped back into their lives with cautious determination. She used her wealth and connections to secure best specialists for Mason, ensuring he received cutting-edge treatment. She also launched a foundation, MidnightTales, inspired by the stories she read to Mason at bedtime, to help families facing medical crises. Slowly, she rebuilt her bond with Mason, attending every appointment, learning to administer his medications, and spending hours playing his favorite games. She was there for the small moments, his giggles over a Superman comic, his sleepy murmurs as she tucked him in. David watched, wary but hopeful, as Sarah proved her commitment. 3 months later, Mason's condition had stabilized, his weekly treatments showing remarkable progress. In his hospital room, surrounded by books and toys, the three of them sat together, reading a story from MidnightTales, a collection Sarah had created to share their journey with other families. Mason looked up, his eyes bright. "Daddy, are we a family again?" David and Sarah exchanged a glance, their careful conversations about the future unspoken but growing stronger. "We're working on it, buddy," David said, ruffling his son's hair. Mason grinned, his smile a beacon through their darkest days. Families help each other when someone's sick. Families stay together. Sarah reached for David's hand, her touch tentative but warm. "He's wiser than us," she said softly. David squeezed her hand, a quiet agreement. "He saw you when I couldn't. Kids see with their hearts." 6 months later, Mason was declared in full remission. The hospital corridor, once a place of fear, now felt like a path to hope as they walked out after his final treatment. Mason held both their hands, his Superman pajamas faded but still vibrant. "I told you it was Mommy," he said, looking up at them. "I never forgot her." Sarah knelt, hugging him tightly. "And I never forgot you, sweetheart. Not for a single day." David watched, a quiet truth settling in his chest. Sometimes, love doesn't vanish, it waits, patient and steadfast, for a child's faith to guide it home. Sarah had learned to balance her career with motherhood, her Midnight Tales Foundation growing into a lifeline for countless families. David had returned to work, secure in the knowledge that Mason would always have the care he needed. More importantly, he'd learned that people leave not because they don't love you, but because they haven't yet learned to love themselves. As they stepped into the sunlight, Mason's laughter echoed, a sound that carried them forward. Love, David realized, was like the stories in Midnight Tales, timeless, resilient, and always waiting for the right moment to find its way back home.